We're going to go ahead and get started today. I want to thank everyone for coming. All of us here at the YWCA welcome you to today's policy briefing as part of our Stand Against Racism. My name's Casey Harden. I'm the interim CEO at YWCA USA. Today and this event is really important to us. This is year 10 of our annual Stand Against Racism, so it has special meaning for us every year, but especially this year. For our 10th year, we talked about what we wanted the theme to be, and when we landed on it, on the theme that we'll be discussing today, team members knew it was the theme for the 10th year. We're so proud to be exploring and promoting the topic of women of color in leadership. We know this topic isn't new because women of color have been leading throughout history. And we know this isn't new because it's those very women who have affected change and affected milestone moments in history of the United States and across the globe. And right now, more than ever, perhaps, we know that the United States needs the leadership of women of color. We need more leadership by women of color, and that's what we'll be promoting and talking about today. And even though we're on Capitol Hill, our Stand Against Racism event is actually a grassroots movement. We have over 500 events occurring in 40 states from Alaska to Florida over the time period of our stand, which is just a few days. And I mention this to say that not only are we in excellent company, but know that out in all the communities where we exist and even further out, that those that are involved in our direct service, in our public policy work, are all working together to really explore the theme, of course, of ending racism, but also really celebrating and discussing ways to really create more, take the barriers away to get more women of color in leadership positions. I want to take 1 minute, this is not on the script to the comms team, I'm telling you, but I want to take one moment to have all of the women of color that are my colleagues, that I get the pleasure of working with every day, and that provide leadership to me and are role models for me, to stand up so that the folks here can see all of you. So if my colleagues who are women of color leading the YWCA USA, oh, there's another one, Joy and Anitra. They're coming in. There's Alicia. So good timing, gals. Terrific. So without delaying anything further, I want to thank our gracious co-hosts. They're not here right now, but Senator Mazie Hirono and Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman. I think we may get a visit from Representative, but she's not here right now. I also want to give a shout out to Jessica Pinkney. She's our government relations manager, and she is really the brain and the brawn behind today's event. So thank you, Jessica. And standing next to her is Catherine Bean, our Director of Public Policy and Advocacy. Thank you, Catherine. So I'm so excited to have you all join me in welcoming our incredible panelists, and who will be our incredible moderator, Simone Sanders. We are so excited to have all of you, and we're so excited, Simone, to have you moderating this really, really important discussion. Simone has a terrific bio, which you all have access to, but just to give you a quick highlight, she's a CNN political commentator, a champion for women, and a political strategist. She was the youngest press secretary for a major political campaign, and we know that you are a woman of color who has led change and is leading change and will lead change. So thank you.
I'm going to have to stand for that. Thank you so much. I am very excited to be here today, moderating what I think is one of the most important panels of the year. I am a woman of color in leadership, and as a woman of color in media and as a woman of color in politics, I can tell you that I've been in far too many rooms where there is no one with so much as a ponytail, let alone some melanin. So I think this is extremely, extremely important. We know women are leading the charge on everything in every single area, and we have to focus on elevating those voices. There were so many times on the campaign trail when I went to buildings and I literally could not get in. because people did not believe I was who I said I was. There were multiple times where state troopers or security tried to yank me out of the senator's entourage because the black girl couldn't have been with Bernie Sanders. So I so appreciate this conversation, and I am excited for you to hear from our panelists and more excited for our very interactive conversation. So with that, I would like to introduce our first panelist. We have with us the amazing Lillian Rodriguez Lopez. She is the Vice President of Stakeholder Relations and Customer PAC Support at the Coca-Cola Company. Please give a warm round of applause for Ms. Lillian Rodriguez Lopez.
Thank you, everyone. The first thing I'd like to ask is, could people move up? There's so many empty chairs here. If you want the A seats, the orchestra seats, they're actually available to you right here in the front. I'm being serious, because either you sit in the back because you're sneaking out early, which I understand, so stay back there, or you don't want to sit in the front, and I prefer that we make eye contact with everyone that is here. So I have a little bit of a disclaimer. I've been with the Coca-Cola Company for 5 years. My early career was actually in government. I worked in New York in the Health and Hospitals Corporation for about 11 years. And then I ran a nonprofit, a national nonprofit, the Hispanic Federation out of New York. And I was with them for 16 years, 8 years as their president. So I have a wide and varied career in terms of all three sectors. So the good news is the things that you experience as a woman or as a woman of color, it's the same in all three. The bad news is the things you experience as a woman in color, it's the same in all three. And while we're here and we're talking about racism, I could tell you, ladies, it was no easier being a woman, being Latina, being young, than it was now being old, Latina, and a woman. So when I was as lovely as some of the people in the room, 22, 23, it was ageism. I always felt like people wanted to pat me on my head. I needed to grow into my stature, gain my gravitas, gain my professional maturity. Now I'm in a room and it's like, well, she's not a millennial, or she's not hip, she doesn't know how to Twitter. So, what I'm trying to say is you face all kinds of biases, and people are always trying to slice and dice and cut you in all different ways. It's not always a bad thing. Many times it's to try to help figure you out or figure out ways that you could relate to the person. So what do I mean by that? So I'm Hispanic, and so it's like, oh, she's Latina. Okay, we're good. Now, are you Mexican? Are you Cuban? Are you Puerto Rican? Oh, she's Puerto Rican. Okay, we got a better connection. Are you from the Northeast? Are you from California? Are you from Texas? So it's just about ways of peeling back those layers so that you can really relate to people and understand them better. So I'm just saying that, I've been subject to all of that and probably victimized some people with it as well, in terms of trying to build relationships. One of the things that we were asked to respond to is, what are some of the barriers that I've found in all sectors, but particularly now being in a wonderful company that is in the Fortune 100, but clearly, a big company. It is difficult for people to relate to you. You are constantly trying to find ways of expressing your viewpoint and your experience and your knowledge in a way that people can understand the value you bring, the seriousness in which you approach your work and your career. Access. Right, access to the right rooms, access to the right conversations. It doesn't always exist. As you said, my dear, there are many rooms where I am the only person of color. I can be the only woman in the entire room. Even if it's a room that's more diverse, I'm still the only woman in the room. So how do you access those rooms? How do you access those conversations? How are you able to influence? Because at the end of the day, that's really important. It's really important to, yes, be able to represent well, to be able to bring value to whatever program, initiative, work, job, issue you're addressing, but you got to know, and people have to open the doors for you. The other big barrier in a big company like mine is sponsors. Everyone will talk to you about coaches and mentors, excuse me. They're equally important. Yes, you want to have someone that you can talk to, you can bounce ideas. But there is a difference between being coached and mentored and being sponsored. That sponsor, and I've had them, make sure that I am in the right rooms, I am in the right conversations. People know me and they know about me. The other barrier is unpopular in a room of women, but I think it's important to talk. We need to change the rhetoric. There's something called women on women crime. In the Hispanic community, we say, quítate tú pa ponerme yo. You get out of the way so I can slip in your spot. We can't do that anymore. It doesn't mean we're all friends. It doesn't mean we all like each other. It doesn't mean we're ever going to like each other. But we absolutely have to be respectful of our gender and our role and what we bring as women. What's helped me? I've been very perseverant. I've actually been seen as being relentless. I've had huge adaptability. So what does that mean? And then I know I have 1 minute. I already got my note. And I use some of it so these ladies can move up and get into the orchestra seats. And this is a serious comment. You can bring your authentic self to work, but you don't have to bring it every day. You don't have to bring it in every setting. I talk to people about being able to dial it up and dial it down, understanding the culture of the organization, the culture of the room that you're in, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're in government, or you're in a corporation. We each have our unique cultures, and clearly, in addition to being Latina, being a woman, being a baby boomer, being older, New Yorker. By the way, in a place like Coca-Cola, New York trumps everything. And I have two people from my team here, Cherie and Felicia. They're always like, oh my God, the New York is coming out. You are defined by who you are, and you have all these experiences. But you've got to figure out, how do I stay authentic, but how do I adapt to the environment that I'm in? And by the way, no doubt, show up. Because there are times, many times, when I know the importance of who I am and what it represents for women or women of color in my company, and I'm going to show up. And for too long, in many of these sectors, we've had people who have said, well, no, I want to be known for my talent. I want to be known for my skills. I want to be known for my experience. Well, let me tell you something. That's a bunch of bullshit, because when they fire you, what comes out is that you were Hispanic or you were African American or you were Asian. You must own who you are, and you must use that to bring value to the work, to the experience, to building the networks. I cannot emphasize that as enough, because when something goes wrong, that's what you turn into, or that's what you turn to, your networks and your culture and your family and your friends and the people who value and understand your work. And when you deny that in any setting you're in, you're losing an essential part of who you are.
Well, y'all go ahead and give Ms. Lillian Rodriguez Lopez a round of applause. We're going to talk more about our authentic selves during our Q&A. Thank you. Next, we're going to have remarks from Ms. Letitia Smith Evans-Haynes. Now, Ms. Letitia Smith Evans-Haynes is the Vice President for Institutional Diversity and Equity at Williams College. And if you don't know anything about Williams College, it is a highly selective private liberal arts college in Massachusetts, correct? It is. And so I am very excited to hear from our next panelist. So please give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I definitely will start by saying that I sit here and before you on the shoulders of giants, and always like to recognize those who have come before me, not only my parents, my family members, my ancestors, but the Constance Baker Motleys, Linda Browns, Elaine Joneses, Adrienne Davises, and the list goes on. I would not be here today as a Black woman if it were not for them advocating not only for other people of color, but for all who are historically marginalized and disenfranchised. and discriminated against in this country. So and thank you, those were great remarks. I'm like scared to go now. I feel like I was at church.
To dial it up.
To dial it up.
I listen. It's like coming back to church in D.C. I was living in D.C. or in Alexandria, working in D.C. right before I moved over to Williams, and was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for quite some time. So this is like coming home, and I really appreciate the invitation. So in terms of, I'm going to take it in you asked us to talk about some, what's led to our successes. I think the first thing I should share is that I feel it's imperative that we all define our own success, like what is successful to us, and not rely on others to make that determination. So in my life, I do feel like I've been successful. I feel like I've been blessed. I feel like I've been fortunate. I have many colleagues and friends whom I grew up with, who did not have the same opportunities at the same times that they were presented to me. I was able to take advantage of whatever was presented to me, not everything, but many things that they just didn't have access to. And we clearly ended up in different places. So I would say that the support of family and friends was a huge factor in my success. Just being supported by family in particular. I can think back to even just elementary school, junior high school, making critical decisions that I didn't realize until today or years ago were very critical decisions. And I'm a New Yorker too, so Brooklyn, I should say. And I had a lot of decisions that I could have made. And I think that being grounded in the truth and reality is critically important. Knowing who you are and where you are at all times and how those around you perceive you. And thinking, and that relates to the opportunities that they will afford you in many ways. Acknowledging, again, history, I think, provides significant perspective for me because I realize and I'm constantly reminded that people have been there before. Like, this is not something that, whatever's happening to me, whether I feel like I'm being discriminated against, for example, because of my race or gender, I am not the first. This is not, other people have experienced this, and maybe not in this particular setting, but that provides perspective and tells me I can get past this. This is nothing compared to what those who came before me dealt with. And then aligning myself definitely with sponsors, as a point you just made, is critically important. And they don't have to be women of color. They can be any color, right? But they must make sure that they appreciate and recognize the challenges that you as a woman of color will face, or that I as a woman of color will face in whatever, as opportunities present themselves, whatever field and whatever I'm doing, whether it's at my job, whether it's as I'm sitting on a board, that's critically important. And the way that I have been able to identify folks that have my best interests at heart and truly kind of separate out sponsors from others, they'll say to you, in 2 years, I think you could do this. In 4 years, I think you could be a president. I mean, those are comments that I'm like, wow. So oftentimes, I think that you're fortunate if you have a leader whom you either report to, some way, somewhere up the ladder, who feels that way about you, but it doesn't have to be them. And I think that identifying true leaders who actually understand and appreciate that your success is a direct reflection on theirs is very important. Okay, real quick. So I think that barriers I identify two. People and situations, right? Situations, there could be a financial situation, it could be a family situation. I'm also a mother. Everything that I do, I think of that first because that's most important to me at this point in my life. When I didn't have a child, I didn't think about that, right? That this was like I can move wherever I want to move. I can be wherever I want to be. And then people, again, thinking about who you're working for and whether they have your interests at heart or they care. Sometimes they don't, and maybe maybe they shouldn't. But you have to put it in perspective again, and think about how is this affecting me. So those are the two in terms of barriers. And I have been in the legal sector and the education sector. Again, similar challenges faced. Currently in academia, I can say that many institutions like Williams were not designed for people of color at all, period, right? Forget about administrators, but we're talking about students, faculty, and when you look at the numbers right now and who's attending these institutions, they're still struggling oftentimes. So to think that it would just automatically be accepting or a great thing or perceived as a great thing for a person of color or a woman of color to lead one of those institutions or to be in a leadership position, it's just not something that people think about. They still don't think about that today, right? So you don't see the great numbers. Usually, unless you're talking about a historically minority-serving institution. Law was the same thing. The number of, I was at a corporate law firm prior to going to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the number of associates of color outweighed the number of partners by a lot, and then the number of associates just completely dwindled. I remember being one, like out of an office of 250, one black woman, or just one black associate. And I was like, this is incredible, because when I started here, there were 10 or more, right? Which is not a lot, again, with 250. So you face the same challenges with access to people, to mentors, people who are there to really support you and to do what's in your best interest. So I think that's kind of all I'll say right now. And then, is that good? I missed the chime, right?
That's okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before we introduce our next panelist, we have a special guest with us. Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman is with us. She is the representative of New Jersey from New Jersey's 12th Congressional District, and she is one of the founders of the first and only Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls. So she's a champion for not only Black women and girls, but all women and girls. So we're happy to have you. Thank you.
I happen to also be the only African-American woman in the delegation coming from the state of New Jersey, so I get it, I get what it's like to be lonely, to be the only, since this is, you are the one who's taking the chance, and it's worth it. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank you all for convening this. The discussion about the intersection of race, ethnicity, and sex is something that we should all be talking about, particularly when we see a country that could benefit so much from more women in charge, working in the space, and definitely more diversity in race and national origin and ancestry and, all those good things. So thank you all for being here and being interested in this discussion. I thank my staff for being able to facilitate your being here in this particular room. Thank you for asking us. I know that this is a very prestigious panel, and you've got a lot to share, and those in the audience are very fortunate to have you. I just have a few things that I want to just say to you. First of all, is that women of color leading change is not a new phenomenon. I know for myself, I know I'm standing on the shoulders of people like Shirley Chisholm and Rosa Parks, and even Michelle Obama to some extent. My granddaughter will be standing on her shoulders, and so many more. I also know that the color of leadership doesn't always look like us, but the need for leadership to look like us all is very important. And so you may find yourselves working in space that you are the only, you are the first, and it may not be the most comfortable space, but we all have to, step out there on faith and do the thing that we do. And we tend to be very serious about the work that we do. We tend to be overly qualified and overly ready for the task that is at hand. But that's just a fact of life. And I tell young women in particular, even young men, don't be angry and don't be bitter. It just is. I know that when I grew up, my father and mother would say to me all the time, if you want to be considered equal to that, then you got to work harder, you got to be smarter, you got to get better grades before they even consider you. And so that's a fact of life. But you know what? As women and as women of color, we can handle that. Is that not so? That's right. And so the other thing I just want to share with you is that we also have another responsibility. To be the leaders that we can be, to be in those positions of authority and responsibility, but to bring somebody up and along. Right. Because we are stronger as we build larger legions of young people and new people who will be able to step into these positions. So I thank you for considering this discussion, for standing up for the elimination of racism and sexism as well. And know that there are people here in Congress, whether or not we're in the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls, the Hispanic Caucus, the Asian Caucus, or the whatever Progressive Caucus. You got people that are ready to fight for you and work with you. God bless you and have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you. We are so happy the Congresswoman could join us today. Wasn't that inspiring?
Yes.
I took some notes, so we'll be circling back on that during the Q&A. All right, next we are going to hear from the amazing Fatima Gross-Graves. Miss Fatima Gross-Graves is the Senior Vice President for Programs and President-elect of the National Women's Law Center. So please give her a warm round of applause and welcome.
Thank you, and thank you to the YWCA and all of you who put this together and for including me. And I've been thinking a lot about leadership as we've been working on a leadership transition at the National Women's Law Center. We are a 45-year-old organization that is founder-led. So it is not just that I'm the new president following founders who've been mentors to me as well, and I'm going to talk about that. So leadership has been on my mind. For women of color, we're both really visible and kind of invisible in these spaces, especially when you make a mistake. When you make a mistake, extremely visible. And that can weigh on people, right? That can really weigh on people and make it so that you don't try the next time. And so one thing that I have always carried with me is that everyone makes mistakes and that you should always try the next time. But the other side of that is real invisibility around the work that women of color are doing within organizations at all levels. Even when you were the only person in the room, as has already been described, and you'd be surprised how often you were the only person in the room. That's been true working in really progressive spaces. I will be sometimes the only woman of color, certainly the only Black woman at tables around civil rights broadly, around the women's community, around labor. And that carries the burden of raising all the women of color issues. Can we not forget about women of color and the fact that they make up half of the women who work in low-wage jobs, always the one to raise that point. It also means that you worry if you're not there. What happens if I miss that meeting? Because then there's going to be no woman of color at this very large table. That's a heavy burden to carry. The second piece of that is that it sometimes is lonely. And it can be lonely to be the only person of color. And as you move up within institutions, you find your counterparts might not look like you as well. And there are lots of things to do about that, but I think it's an additional burden or barrier to talk about. The other thing is sometimes just getting into the door is the big burden. Right? There's all this work around how do you hire in ways to create diverse institutions. But at the same time and time again, they're like, there's just no people. There's just no qualified people. I couldn't find anyone. And that cannot be the case. I look at this room and I say that cannot ever be the case. And there's been enough work that there are specific steps that organizations can take to ensure they always have a diverse slate when they're thinking about hiring people. So it's no longer a mystery. These are things we know. The question is whether there's leadership will to implement them. And people have talked about sponsors, and I fully agree. And oftentimes there's someone who is trying to be that sponsor to you, and you don't even realize it. You don't even realize that this is the person that's creating a pathway that is opening up an opportunity. I hear a lot of people come to me and they say, I haven't yet found a mentor, and they sometimes don't realize that the person who is making those introductions, opening doors, that's the person who's doing that mentorship. It may not be a formal program where they were assigned to you, but it's the person looking out for you, and you need that. And I have been lucky to have that internally at the National Women's Law Center over my career there, I've been fortunate to have it outside. When I first started at the National Women's Law Center, in the women's community space, especially over a decade ago, doing policy advocacy work, there were not a lot of Black women doing this work. There are more now, but there really weren't over a decade ago. And the ones that were in that work, they all reached out to me. I think about people like Jocelyn Fry and Jackie Berrien and Claudia Withers, who really went out of their way to pause and reassure me that I was on a pathway. The last thing that I will add, and I know there's going to be more time, is creating sort of your peer sister circle. And everyone needs that. And I have really, really needed that. And as a result, I've sort of grown up in this work with a group of women who I can count on and rely on. They are the people who we call each other. They are the people who, as peers, we open doors for each other. They are the people who you could say, is it me or is it everybody else? What is it? I'm not sure. And they are the ones, and I know I need to wrap up, but they are also the ones where we need to be thinking about doing that work that really would happen for us of reaching out and looking out for the next group of people to come along.
Thank you. All right, our next panelist is Ms. Maria Robles Mayer. She is the Chief Strategist and founder of MT Enterprise Inclusion Strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. It's both an honor and absolutely humbling to be sharing space with women up here. So thank you to the YWCA for creating this event, and thank you to all of those who are here with sharing some of your time, and thank you to my fellow panelists for sharing your story. There are so many similarities, and I think you're going to hear us saying some of the same things over and over again, and that's okay. We're coming at it from different perspectives, but it just reaffirms that our struggles and that what we're experiencing and that what you're experiencing is real. So I'm a bit of a philosopher. I love when the Congresswoman said women are prepared. Yeah, I'm prepared, but I'm just going to share some sort of big picture stories. You have my bio. I'm here to bring the public service perspective. But if I may, I want to start with just a question before us. Sitting here, I really can't help but think how different my remarks would be if we were asked to do this panel a year ago. First of all, would we even be tackling this topic? Would we feel the same need of urge to combat racism? Perhaps, but just think about to where you were. What were you thinking? What were you anticipating in April of 2016? I mean, the reality is our nation's changed. And so we now have to ask ourselves, how are we changing? Now more than ever, there's an urgent need for our voices as women of color to be the voices of leadership. As I mentioned, I'm the representative on this panel of public service, and I'll have to say with everything that's going on, I'm still a believer in our system of government. And for that reason, I firmly believe that we deserve the best and brightest to serve in these positions of public service. And I don't mean just elected positions, although those are really important, and I want to see women run. I also mean the staff, the advisors, the policy and communications experts who daily work to keep us functioning. But we know that our voices are too often absent from the seats of influence and political power. We are diverse as a nation, but we are not inclusive, particularly when we get to positions of power. Like a lot of people, I began my career here on Capitol Hill answering telephones. And I eventually worked my way up to very senior level positions in leadership. I've had a myriad of experiences of bosses, of people who have mentored me and people who have challenged me. And also in between, I've had some stints. I haven't had a linear career. I've worked at the local government level. I've worked in private sector positions. And I think this nonlinear path and this diversity of experiences also helped me move and better define what I want out of my career. because it's important to remember our careers are generally not linear paths. And it's really good, particularly early on in your life. I do a lot of career counseling. I see young people who have that 5-year, that 10-year plan. But I really urge you not to go into life with blinders on saying, I'm going to do this, because you really don't even know what you don't know. And being willing to take a chance and be that only person has afforded me experiences and responsibilities that I couldn't have imagined. A culmination of my career came in 2015 when I was named to National Journal's list of 20 most powerful female staffers on Capitol Hill. And I say this not to boast, but I say it more just to sort of put everything in context. Of that list of 20, there were 3 women of color, and I was the only Latina. And I think that has also been a theme of my career. I've had a lot of experiences, like you hear women up here saying, of being the only one. It's good in that it allows you to break ground. On the flip side, yeah, it's lonely. It's hard. You de facto become the go-to person for anything racial, anything diverse. I see a lot of heads nodding. You become that person. And you either are put in a position of choosing to embrace it and say, okay, yeah, I'm that person, or you just want to put your head down and do your own work. Look, I know I've been avoided because I'm the one who will go there, but I take pride in that. You know, developing my inner voice to be a spokesperson, to speak out, has been an evolutionary process. But it becomes a challenge, and a unique challenge for us as women, particularly women of color, to be put in that position. In this world, particularly the political world, where the loudest man usually is the one who wins, we must find our super selves. And I've coined that term. I love that, super selves. Find your super self and the voice she speaks. Because to address the issues and barriers in the workplace, we've got to know where we stand, and we are our own best advocates. I do want to wrap up with addressing an issue we were asked to talk about, which is barriers in the workplace. And I'm going to share it in this fashion. A couple weeks ago, there was an interview I heard on NPR with Lydia Diamond. I don't know if you're all familiar with her, but she's an African-American playwright. And her current production is called Smart People. It's at the Arena Stage. Has anyone seen it? I really hope to get there. It's a wonderful interview with her. Basically, this play addresses the very tough issue of racism couched through diversity and inclusion in elite institutions. What she said in this interview was that essentially we're becoming more sophisticated when we talk about racism because the stakes are becoming much higher. She also cautions, this is a big statement here, she cautions people who are liberal that we move around the issues of social justice with a certain authority that in fact can mask the real issues of racism. I was jumping up and down when I heard that, because for me, this brilliantly sums up the issue we have of the lack of inclusion in the political sphere. Unfortunately, too many of us think we're okay because we have a certain ideology. Mm-hmm. This, unfortunately, doesn't demand change in the way we operate. I'm really proud of the work I've done up here, but after years of working on inclusion, we still don't have the numbers that reflect what we've tried to do. So I do think the issue is first acknowledging we have a problem, and then addressing the issues of a conscious bias because it's real. I don't think it's necessarily unique to our political structure, but it's one that I've experienced, and I look forward to delving a little bit more into when we have the questions and answers. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Maria. Now, what Maria didn't say, I was waiting on her to say it. So, one, Maria is also a fellow Nebraskan. Shout out to Omaha. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. But she was also she led the Senate's diversity inclusion initiative under Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid. And she's very institutional in getting lots of more people of color, specifically women of color, into the Senate. The Senate is a very white place, ladies and gentlemen, and it should reflect the diversity of everyone. So thank you for your work. Last but certainly not least, before we kick off our Q&A, we have Vanessa Jimenez. Vanessa is the Associate Director of the YWCA of San Antonio. Please give her a very warm round of applause. Vanessa?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. I appreciate the invite to come out here and be a part of this wonderful panel. When I first received the invite, I had to read it a couple of times. I was like, wait, I work at the YWCA and I'm a woman of color, but our mission is to empower women. So in terms of barriers to success, well, I mean, that's the mission, to empower us, throughout our work, whatever it is that we're doing at the nonprofit level, right? And so I read it a couple of times and I was like, I don't know, I don't think I'm the right one for this. And I read it, my 13-year-old daughter was there, and she's like glowing, like, oh, how exciting to go to Washington and be a part of this panel with these individuals. And then my mom got there. My parents just recently retired, and they moved to San Antonio. I'm from Laredo, Texas, the border town of Mexico and Texas. And my mom got there for something. And I told her, I said, look, Mom, I got this invite. And she's like, Vanessa, that's good. And I'm like, what? No, but it's not me. That's not who I am. I'm on the ground running. That's what I'm doing with the girls of our community, with all of our field work in the local level and the nonprofit level, right? And so I was like, oh, okay, well, called next day I called Jessica. Jessica, this is what's going on. We have all these things going on. Is it really me? And she says, okay, I'm going to talk to my team, Vanessa, I'll get back with you. So fine, I'm here, right? So I got the chair, so I'm here. So basically, success in the local level in the nonprofit world, working for the YWCA, that's been my career. I started in 2000, and a year and a half into it, I got a knock on the door by a supervisor that came in and said, Vanessa, I need to talk to you. She went upstairs. Going upstairs, that's a big deal. So we went outside. She sits me down on the park bench next door, and she's like, Vanessa, she said all this stuff, and then she's like, we're offering you a position of management. And I was like, right at the time where I was actually looking for a change of job because I needed flexibility as a student. I was working in grad school, so I needed an 8 to 5. So I said, is this like an 8 to 5? She's like, yes. I said, I'll take it. So that was the start. That was one of the things. So flexibility as a student, as a young mom, has led to my success within the YWCA. We have a child care center, and both my 9-year-old and my 13-year-old went through our child care center at the YWCA. And that has helped me to contribute to my success as a working mom, as well as a working student. Regarding barriers working at a nonprofit, one, funding. I would not have been offered that position had there not been that funding to open up that department or that new work that I was going to be doing, right? So funding is always an issue, and who's providing the funding? Usually, a distribution committee that consists of white men. So, we have to live up to what it is that they're expecting of us and the work that we're doing. So that's a big barrier to growing within a nonprofit, as well as the positions. We're a very small nonprofit, and then if you go to, our CEO used to say, we used to go to all of our regional meetings, and you would see just the head full of gray hairs across, the room, right? Because, we were in our positions and they stayed. So it was hard to move up and to succeed, and they stay and they stay and they stay. So those are two barriers in the nonprofit sector that can hinder success in the nonprofit world. So those are a couple of things in terms of the nonprofit work. And in terms of issues for women of color and the work that I'm doing a lot of work with young girls. And so that glow that my daughter had when I was telling her the story, and that glow when I told her, yes, okay, Valeria, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., that is what is missing with our young girls of today. They don't have that person that they could look up to. So a lot of the staff, a lot of the panelists here have been talking about mentors and the sponsors. Well, a lot of our girls are not being seen. They're not being given the time of day. And so that's our role as a local nonprofit in San Antonio, Texas, where I could be working in the municipal court, providing a workshop to girls that have been in the juvenile system, and 60% of the population is Hispanic or Mexican American usually. Well, the room is full of black and brown. what's the problem here. So that is our role at the YWCA in San Antonio in initiating a venue or an avenue for these girls to look up to someone and to be given those leadership opportunities and belief in that role that they would not have been given because of the generational poverty that is there. You know, a lot of them are going to be first generational, you know, college students, and so we need to build them up, and that is what we're doing on the nonprofit level. And so providing that glow, providing that respect and that dignity for these youth, specifically in San Antonio, Texas, through our YWCA work.
Thank you. So with that, we are going to go into our Q&A. I'm going to start with the question, and then I encourage the audience to please get ready because this is going to be an interactive session, and we really want to hear your questions. So I am going to go, I want to talk about microaggressions and unconscious bias at work. Many of you cited, Lillian, I love what you said about bringing your authentic self to work, but you got to know when to dial it up and dial it down. Letitia, you talked about many schools like Williams, not being designed for people of color. Maria, you've done this work with so many different offices and groups and people. Vanessa, you gave us some real life talk about it. And Fatima, you talked about a lot of times you're the only woman in the room, sometimes woman of color. So many people on the panel cited microaggressions and unconscious biases at work being a big part of what stifles mobility for women of color moving upward. I don't know if recently you all saw the hashtag that Brittany Packnett started, hashtag Black Women at Work. I think we could amend that to be women of color at work, women at work, ponytails at work, bald girls at work, whoever. But it's shown a spotlight on this issue. So what steps I'm going to ask each of you to respond. I'm going to hold you to 1 minute and 30 seconds, and I'm going to time you. But what steps can employers and coworkers alike take to, kind of not mitigate these practices? Yes, stop them, but we know it's going to take time. And then what steps do you think Congress can take, and how can they jump in? Lillian, let me get my timer out.
One of the things that I've been advocating for, and I have the benefit of working for Coke, but serving on a couple of Hispanic advisory councils for other companies, is it's one thing to have diverse slates, it's another thing to have diverse interviewers. You can put a diverse slate and have 4 people, white male, white woman, black male, and a Hispanic woman, but if the people who are interviewing you do not understand the value that you bring and those experiences and how you can slot in to that position in the company, there's no relatability. And they've done studies on that to show that it's really about who's interviewing you, not just who's being interviewed. You've got to have people who can understand and bring it. The other thing that I think is, and I say this at Coke, and my team is all women. In my shop, because I really want people to work and get stuff done. And I have to say, now men are amazing too, but I'm saying I have the benefit of having all women, and I have an extremely diverse women. I have 2 African Americans, we're 2 Latina, 3 African American, 2 Latinas, and 2 white women, and we work really well together because we fostered an environment of support. And I think that's really important too. And what can Congress do? Congress needs to look at what types of programs are available and what can they do to support women in the workplace. Believe it or not, I had someone on my team who worked on a major program to get 12 weeks of paid parental leave at Coke. We did not have that until this year. And Val was one of 5 young women, including one that didn't have kids, who said, we're going to make a business case for why everyone should have parental leave, 12 weeks paid, whether you're women, whether you're men, whether you're LGBT. And they got it through all the way to the board on a global scale, so you can make change. But there's certain things that we shouldn't have to work so hard to get. They're just the right thing to do.
Exactly. Maria, I'm gonna come to you now. Same question. So what can Congress do, but what can employers, and I would also say coworkers, because a lot of these microaggressions, yes, they come from the top down, but sometimes it's that sister sitting next to you, or that brother across from you, or the man on the CNN panel. That puts his hand in your face. And you gotta remember you're on national television. So what can we do?
No, that's real. in the work I've done, so many of the complaints that I heard from staff, it was fellow staff, just not getting it, the comments, and then do you elevate it and become that person? In terms of what Congress can do, let me just, I don't know if this is what you mean, but this is where I'm going to go with this. Congress needs to make itself as accountable on diversity hiring as they require the federal agencies. And I know there's some efforts and there's some proposed legislation. It can be fixed, but there's requirements, reporting requirements for agencies on numbers, recruitment, where they recruit. Some of that may be rolled back right now, but that's at least in place. President Obama had an executive order, but Congress doesn't follow that, and that is part of the difficulty we face with trying to develop inclusive staffs here. We have a decentralized hiring system. We have a non-transparent hiring system. People they like just to repeat. We want to do things that are easy. So this is the way you always hired, and this is the one person you always hired for resumes, and I don't want to deal. Just keep giving me resumes. You're going to just perpetuate the status quo, whether it's gender, equity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity. So we need some transparency here to help that. The microaggressions, again, I think all public offices need to go through unconscious bias training. I know high tech is beginning to do that more and more. I don't know about a lot of corporate America, but absolutely, it's a small step. But again, acknowledging that it's real and raising awareness is the first step.
Thank you. Fatima. I would love for you to speak specifically about in the women's space, because we know intersectionality is very important, but there are lots of spaces that have not done intersectionality well. The civil rights movement did not do intersectionality well, and the women's rights movement is one of those places where we're trying, but there's still a long way to go. So let's talk about that.
I only have a minute.
A minute and 30.
So that work is long, but here's what's really exciting about this moment is, and I think digital spaces have really contributed to it, is that it has changed the playing field and changed the number of voices that can be out there at the same time. And so the historical gatekeeping that really left women of color out of the conversation and out of the table, the stage, whatever the platform you're talking about, that has been disrupted. And so in this moment, there's really an opportunity to, and I hope we do it in a real way, but to build differently, to build for the longer term in a way that is intergenerational, that is interracial, and that is seriously centering women of color, both their needs and voices, but actually having them really at the table in the decision making. And so that is my hope from where we can go. If I could say one thing about Congress, because we're here. So Congress has an opportunity to prod organizations to do things. So there are some companies, because they have been sued or because they have been embarrassed or because they have been extremely pressed internally by their employees or their consumers, who have taken important changes. Tech is a really good example, right? There is a huge light shown on tech, and so some of their initiatives are a response. Congress can create the pressure by passing meaningful legislation that prompts companies to make the sort of changes that would make a difference. So we are in this posture where there's a lot of defensive conversation, and we cannot forget about the proactive vision that people want and are calling for, and that you see moving at a state and local level in a different way.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Yes. So in our work, a lot of things that we push, and we haven't really talked much about it, is education and higher education, and that can contribute to, a decrease in the potential mobility of women of color succeeding. And so our role right now is having these conversations with our youth, We haven't, right now is the space, right now is the time to start having those discussions and having our youth prepared to have these discussions with others whenever they're in different rooms, whether it be with a teacher who says something that they shouldn't have said, and bringing it to the forefront and say, hey, that was wrong, or hey, this is me, that's you. So that's something that we are doing at the nonprofit level. In terms of employers, we should be having that space to have those trainings, like you said, and talking about the unconscious bias that's present, and bringing that to awareness. But right now, a lot of our work is focusing on transitioning this to the next generation because they don't know, and so that's where we're at right now.
Thank you. Letitia.
The reason that I mentioned the what in most institutions that are not historically minority serving institutions, who they were designed to serve is because it just gives us that historical perspective. So, Williams, the first woman graduated in the late 1970s, right? So we're talking about not only women, but then people of color were just not designed to be there. That is like kind of writ large what was happening at many institutions around the nation. But I'm just gonna step out of the education space for a second. For me, it's really important to acknowledge what bias is and why it actually exists. And I think that, again, the only way to do that is by acknowledging historically what happened, and since we're in the United States, in this country decades ago, right? So we're talking about the Supreme Court, we're talking about the federal government, we're talking about state governments sanctioning discrimination on the basis of race, on the basis of gender, repeatedly sanctioning it in court decisions and also in actions. So when we talk about today implicit bias, which is unconscious bias, oftentimes it's not implicit and it's not unconscious. So people need, I think, to actually have a firm understanding of what the difference between explicit biases and unconscious/implicit biases, because much of what we're seeing is explicit. So the tendency to rely on the implicit and unconscious exists because that's an easy out, and people can say, oh, I didn't know that I was doing it, or I didn't know that this was the effect. That's not true. We are not far enough past Brown versus Board of Education, all these cases, for it to be happening unconsciously, if you will, right? So if there's even a thought in your mind that says, oh, this black person can't do this, or this Latino person can't do it, that's explicit. That's not implicit, all right? But I'm saying, but these thoughts actually exist. So to me, that's where, and I think it's a very dangerous thing. And I think that companies, the government, whomever, schools need to really look at the disparate impact that the policies that they are having. I mean, you talked about this policy, the 12-week leave policy. That's great. Whatever policies they have, if they're having a disparate impact, whether it's in hiring or even in promotions, once people are hired, same thing at the education level, K-12 and higher education, they need to really look at those. And I don't think there's a tendency to do that. And I'll say one other thing, because my minute and a half is probably up. But I remember last summer when we were on campus, at Williams, we had a series of discussions because of all the black and brown women and men who were being gunned down by the police. And a few incidents happened over the summer in particular. So there were students there who were getting ready to start their first year. And I was really struck by these young students of color in particular who were saying they were in shock. They were like, why is this happening? Like, this has never happened before. And I was like, this happens every day. This has been happening every day of my life, and I'm not that old. But like, every single day. And the reason that you think that this is just happening is because of what Fatima said, the power of social media, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying, I know it's like a lot, I was just telling you, but the bias that we see in large part, I argue, is explicit bias. It is not unconscious, it is not implicit. And so whatever training and discussions we lead around this issue need to be tailored that way. So.
All right, snaps for that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I was at Harvard like 2 weeks ago at this event with the young students, the undergrads. And so every time somebody said something great, they were snapping. And I leaned over, I was like, why is everyone snapping? They were like, it's kind, it's not disruptive. I was like, this is the bougiest thing I've ever learned. So ladies and gentlemen, when you hear something good and you're at an event, you should snap. Don't clap, it's very disruptive. So with that, I want to open this up to the floor for some questions from the audience, and then to our panelists. If one or two folks could answer these questions, so we can hopefully get additional questions in. Jessica's walking around with the microphone. I know you have some questions. We've had a very engaging conversation. There we go. All right, let's do it. And again, if you hear something you like.
Hi, Lisa Thomas with the American Federation of Teachers. And so my question to the panel is that recent reports have come out about the need to diversify the education workforce and how important having teachers of color, teachers of different ethnicities and languages and orientations are critical to student success. Yet, our education workforce remains at roughly 78% white women. So what are your recommendations in increasing the number of teachers of color and diversity in the pipeline?
All right. What two would like to take that?
I'll start. I also have seen a report that's talked about why some Black teachers are leaving teaching as well, and I think that's really critical to put on the table, because when they are, if they make it through the gateways to be there, when they are there, then they're put in roles where they're forced to be the sort of policers of Blackness, and who wants that to be their job, and things that are not good for children generally. So I think we have to watch the teaching profession and watch what's happening there. There certainly are things that could be done. There are trainings, there's investing in education programs that Congress could prioritize if it wanted to. Certainly, the Department of Education under the Obama administration had been prioritizing this issue. And one of the things that we have now that we didn't have before is more information about who really is making up our teaching workforce by race and by gender. That's information we didn't have in real ways before. And so hopefully that transparency will help too.
Real quick, I think we also need to stop demonizing the profession. There was a time, my mother is a retired school teacher, and my sister just retired last year, and it became increasingly difficult, and people now feel that, well, you know what, it was like nursing, it was revered. And we've made it, they don't teach, they don't do this, they don't do that. So people are saying there are other ways to make what we make, suffer what we suffer in the system, because it's hard work. It's not like people think. It's not summers off and, vacations at Christmas. And so we need to elevate the profession once again to what it was, which is such a valued, revered role in society, because it's children, and there's nothing more important.
Which also includes training and higher pay
Right.
as incentives.
I say 15 seconds. Also, I think we should stop demonizing public education. I think that is a huge problem as well. I mean, I'm an advocate for good education, period, overall, but I certainly don't think that there are other forms of education that are better necessarily, especially based on the data. Thanks for the snaps. So that, and I also think that we have to recognize that the education system, and if you're talking about K-12 in particular, as well as higher education, it still lives within the whole structural racism world, right? So even where you have sometimes the diversity present in a school, you have a quote-unquote tax on many teachers, and you mentioned that they feel like they have to be the quote-unquote black police or whatever it is. And in addition to that, there are, I'm sorry, I just lost my thought. In addition to that, there are almost expectations that are placed on them because of structural racism about what's supposed to happen. I mean, I worked in a school system really quickly down south, and I remember the predominantly African-American high school and the predominantly white school. When I looked at the discipline rates, wholly different. When I looked at who was leading the school, the predominantly African-American school, it was a black principal. And I was like, what's going on here? The superintendent's like, I don't have any idea what's going on. I'm like, you should. You should, because you are sanctioning what's happening here. And it's okay. It's not only okay, almost expected, if you will. So I'm just throwing that out because I know that there's a lot of debate about, are more teachers of color better and what effect? Oh, people say, well, they're a teacher of color. They're kicking the kid out of class. Okay, but they are here in this system.
Thank you. Yes.
So Tysley Williams with YWCA USA, thanks for all your info. My question centers around how we can discern as consumers if companies share our values.
Ooh.
So would love to get your thoughts on those indicators that we should look into. We know that many companies espouse to share our values, but how are we as consumers able to discern the legitimacy of that?
Cans of soda will not stop police brutality, ladies and gentlemen.
The opinions expressed are not necessarily those of management.
That was Pepsi, it wasn't Coke, yeah.
So, yeah, I know, I just want to say that, and it's a competitor but sister company, and we do not share their sentiments or their views on how they manage that particular one. I would say that, how does a consumer know? I want to flip that question if I can a little bit. I think you need to know that many companies are very, very serious about not only their corporate social responsibility, but their corporate impact. And there's a difference. It's not just about what you do, but what change you're really affecting and what legacy you're really building. And so also I think that for companies, it differs based on who the consumer is, right? And what your passion points are and what you really care about. At our company, we're really focusing on trust and transparency, right? What do people really want to know about our products and our actions, whether if it's in the diversity and inclusion space, whether it's in the LGBT space. We've been, pretty vocal out there in terms of not only some of our sign-ons, but some of our advocacy in that area, as well as around immigration reform, understanding that we are a global company. We know who buys our products. We know the importance of multiculturalism. And we also, more importantly, we know who works for us and what the importance of that is in terms of jobs and economy for community. There's a lot that people can study on the websites and, the public statements and all that. But I want to tell you, too, the consumer's really smart. The consumer's really tracking social media and actions, and they're reacting to it. Whether it's, this incident that you just referenced, whether it's what's happening with some of the airlines, whether it's with our company or other companies, people are wired in, they care, and they're letting their opinions and their passion points be known, and we react to that. We care about that. We know the importance of the consumer and what you drive in terms of our products and our services. And if we ever forget that, shame on us.
Love it. I think we have time for one more question, so you're going to bring us home.
Hi, my name is Lakeisha Steele. I work for Senator Durbin. So I am part of the 5% of Black staffers in the U.S. Senate. I do have...
Thank you that you're here.
My question for you is, how can we as staffers think more creatively around looking at the intersectionality of issues in policymaking?
That's an excellent question.
Well, I was going to start with a good starting point is knowing the data. So if you're working on an issue, you should know what its impact would be on different populations and getting it in a granular way. I think that's more important now because we're also in a moment where we need to demonstrate that our data sources that we have had are valuable and used and important, and Congress should be paying attention about that. Another piece is talking in really clear terms about who's impacted and having the stories and the people there for that work. I also am hoping that in your office that when you're working on an issue that you're reaching out to a wide range of stakeholders that are representing different communities so that they are also bringing different voices to bear. And then the last thing is, there have been a lot of economic agendas that Congress have put forward. And what I would like to see is an economic agenda that really centers women of color and that talks about their lifespan, and that includes reproductive health, and that is serious in those terms, and that thinks about women of color's lives in those terms, and that be put forward in a serious way as the economic agenda for Congress, not a marginalized economic agenda, as the economic agenda.
Anybody else like to chime in on that? Maria, go ahead.
Well, sure, and thank you for the question. it's not right, but someone said, maybe the congresswoman, it is what it is. The onus is just going to fall on you as a staff of color to be the voice of that issue, at least for now, until you're a larger percentage, or until we've been able to sort of integrate a greater awareness that these are issues that impact us all. But in my experience, I've been there as a young staffer, I do see that sometimes this place depends on fear, and there's a real reluctance to raise the issues. Again, you want to just keep your head down, you want to be that person, you're afraid of rocking the boat, but we've got to support one another. We've got to support institutions and coalitions, such as the staff associations, any vehicle or entity that can unite on the voices that are supporting these issues that impact our communities, and make offices, make your boss, your direct supervisor aware that people do care. Whether it's sharing articles or saying, these community papers aren't included in clips, or these organizations are saying this. It starts with that awareness, and we will have to be the voices until they get this. It's too easy for them. I've had a lot of these conversations where they just don't see the urgency, and they don't think people are paying attention. That's the biggest one, that they don't think people care.
And can I just say, even if you have the time let's say you have the time and capacity to handle all these issues, which you obviously do not, make other people in the office work on them. I mean, you've got to have, I'm not sure what your position is, or if you have anyone working for you, even if it's an intern or whoever, an LC, whatever it is, whoever it is, have them do it. Go look up this data. And they may not want to do it, but guess what? By doing it, they're going to learn something, and they will start to become aware of these situations and these issues.
Absolutely.
Simone, can I make some final parting thoughts?
Sure, I'm gonna give everybody 45 seconds for final parting thoughts.
Okay.
I've done this before, if you haven't noticed. Go right ahead, Lily. Thank you.
First, for Simone Sanders, when they questioned why she was there, I would have said, I'm Bernie's daughter. See Simone Sanders? Just as a joke. So 45 seconds, make smart choices. I believe in personal responsibility. Why not you? That's the question you have to ask yourself when someone said, I got divorced because my ex-husband said to me one day, why do you have to go and not Eric? And I was like, oh, you are definitely the wrong person, love. If you have to question why I'm there. So why not you? And the other thing, very seriously, you are always that person. Don't ever think that you're not that person. I don't care if you're the general counsel for Goldman Sachs. If you are a person of color, you are always that person. And when you forget that, you lose yourself.
We can clap for that. Fatima.
So I have two parting thoughts that are related. The first is put yourself at the table. If you weren't invited, you can still sit down. If you weren't in the room, you need to get in the room and pull up to the table and understand that you belong there. They should have, if they didn't invite you originally, they should have, and that's their mistake. If you see somebody else who doesn't have a seat at the table, pull a chair up for them. And I've been in rooms where literally that has happened, where someone has said, you've come in this room, you don't be on the end of the wall, don't stay out. Sister has pulled up a chair for me. It makes a difference, and remember that both ways.
Thank you. Vanessa.
Yeah, my sentiment exactly. Be the YWCA, cheering us on. Be that one person. Be that glow for someone else too. We don't know what anyone else is going through, so be that for them. To give them that space and to actually see people for who they are. And a lot of times we don't do that. We look past people, and we need to be able to see them. We're not invisible.
And I'll just say, definitely be true to yourself. Do not forget those who are coming behind you. I mean, it's so important to make sure that you offer opportunities to them. It could be something small, whatever it is, just do it. Be humble, definitely know your history. And I say shake the haters. So those who you think are holding you down or holding you back, I mean, be honest with yourself. Sometimes we are in spaces that are not for us. If you say, I'm not working with this person anymore, and there's a reason why, then don't do it. I mean, so, and just don't be afraid to make a change or to leave.
The great American poet Robert Frost had a line that said, he did not see himself as a teacher, but as an awakener. I love that line. Not a teacher, but an awakener. To fight the good fight every day, we need somebody who is going to awaken us, and in turn, somebody who we can awaken. So, good luck.
Thank you. Give our panel a warm round of applause. So I have definitely enjoyed my time with you all. I hope you all took copious notes. And my parting words are to tell somebody about this. And as you're telling them about what you learned today, what you heard on this panel from our amazing panelists, I hope you'll also share the policy recommendations from the YWCA. And with that, I'd like to bring up Ms. Catherine Bean, who is the Vice President of Public Policy and Advocacy at the YWCA, who's going to give us those policy recommendations.
We were joking earlier about how far down I was going to need to move the microphone, but I think I can see over the podium, which is a nice change of pace. What a powerful, powerful discussion here today. Please join me in thanking them again. And what a place to hear these powerful voices and the insights that they shared with us about being women of color, about being women of color and the challenges and opportunities that they have in the space of leading change. They summed up for themselves, for all of us, so powerfully, the messages that we need to be remembering. And the one that I will navigate as a white woman is pull up that chair to the table every single time. And so in addition to everything else, I hope that everyone in the room who is at the table will take very powerfully that message forward. In these halls of Congress, we have a growing number of women who are making a difference, not nearly enough women of color who are making a difference, but we do have some strong women of color leaders here in Congress, and we need to see more of that. Because we need to make sure that our representative body here for our United States government, for communities across the country, is actually reflective of the rich diversity of our communities and the places that we all come from into this city. Congress itself has power to drastically improve the conditions within workplace and education systems nationwide, which are so crucial to leveling the playing field and building a pipeline of women of color in leadership across fields. And the areas of policy that I'm going to highlight for you are summarized in your packets and this little handout. To make sure, I want to call your attention to it. And also in a blog that Jessica Pinckney, our government relations manager, wrote, and that will be posted today on YWCA's website. So there's multiple ways to access the policy recommendations. First and foremost, Congress can support policies like paid family leave, fair pay, and flexible work schedules that enable women to successfully navigate their multifaceted roles in the workplace and at home while preserving opportunities for leadership. Being able to rise through the leadership pipeline really just doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Women and women of color specifically need employers that accommodate the varied needs in the workplace and in the home and allow the flexibility for work-life balance that allow women to become leaders both in the home and in the workplace. I think Letitia said, talking about, I didn't think about being a mom and working until I was a mom. And not every woman in the workplace is a mother, and it's not just about childcare. These policies are important for all the dimensions of home life responsibility, whether that's parents, whether that's a spouse or a partner, whether that's other members of the family that we're taking care of. And we need to make sure that the policies that are put in place, and there are fights going on right now and next week, that will set the stage for whether we get the kind of paid family and paid sick leave that's going to make a difference for working women. Second area is ensuring our workplaces are free from bias and discrimination. That is another area that's critical for congressional leadership and action. Concrete workplace standards and policies that reduce discrimination and biases in hiring, promotions, and leadership development are tangible policies to level the leadership playing field. We can take those as well into corporations and higher education and others in nonprofit spaces. Workplace and federal policies that promote equitable workplaces, especially for fair pay, are the kinds of things that if the federal government requires it, then in these other spaces that will be delivered. A third important area is strong enforcement of current federal policies and increasing data collection around diversity. There are positive steps that Congress can take here. Now more than ever, we need strong protection for Title IX. Enforcement of Title IX by the Department of Education, but also holding firm to make sure we don't lose the important protections for women and women of color, girls and girls of color that Title IX provides. For those of you who may not be as familiar with Title IX, this is the policy or the law that prohibits sex discrimination in education, and it prevents sexual harassment and assault in schools and on campuses, which is really integral to leveling that playing field, making sure schools and educational environments are safe and supportive spaces for all of our learners. A second area in this bucket, I would say, has to do with what's called the civil rights data collection. This is an initiative out of the Department of Education. It's required that they collect data. There's been tremendous progress over the last 8 years in making sure that we learn more about what's called disaggregated data, not just about Black and brown or Asian students and white students, but what's happening to girls of color as well as boys of color, as well as white girls and white boys. Even more, breaking down not just one big bucket of girls of color, but the individual racial and ethnic groups that are represented in our communities and in our schools. And we need to have that data so that we can better target, identify where there are challenges in our educational spheres for girls of color, and make sure we're targeting responses that really support their needs. I would add to this bucket, thanks to Maria's comments, holding Congress to the same hiring accountability standards as the federal agencies is a brilliant new idea that I didn't have coming in the door, and I'd love to spend some brain power figuring out how to make that happen. That's a great contribution. A fourth area is increasing our knowledge base about women's leadership. I went and started looking for data. Several of us have worked on Stand Against Racism this year, and I started poking around, and I found the Department of Labor Women's Bureau website, which I've been to before, and I thought if anyone would have data about women's leadership, surely they would, because they've made tremendous strides in what they report, and it's not there. It's not there yet, but that would be a fantastic home for that kind of data. And so one of our policy recommendations is to really have a concerted effort to make it a responsibility of one of the federal agencies, ideally that particular office, to document women's leadership, and in particular women of color's leadership, to document what the best practices are, to promote strategies like many of the ones that have been mentioned here today for helping to support women of color in leadership. As has been said, we are at a moment in time when the presence of women of color in leadership positions, it's not just a value add. It is a value add, but that's not all. It's actually a necessity. We need diverse minds at the tables in every single room, at every single table, and across every field to solve the issues that the country continues to face in all of these sectors. Women of color bring a unique perspective on the issues and a history of leadership in our nation that needs to be fully recognized, and that there are steps that this Congress can take in order to make that happen. As we close, there are 3 asks that I have of you here today. For those of you in the room who happen to work in a congressional office, my ask is that you carry this message back to your member and to the staff members with whom you work. We've got some informational briefing materials here with you. We are open and available. I think any panelist here would speak to you. Those of us in the YWCA National Office are here as a resource that if your member wants to tackle this issue, we're here to think creatively about how to help make that happen. There are also great campaigns already underway for the Fair Workplace Standards the legislation that we'd love to talk to you about and help promote. For everybody in the room, on social media, we hope that tomorrow you'll be willing to continue the conversation with us during the hashtag Stand Against Racism tweet chat that starts at 3 p.m. Eastern. So please join us online. We had a Facebook Live streaming, Facebook Live, I got it right, Danielle, Facebook Live event last night, and we're carrying it forward tomorrow, which we're very excited about. And then finally, there's an orange poster called the YWCA Stand Against Racism Pledge at the back of the room. On your way out, we would love for everybody in the room to sign that pledge. Join us on what we at YWCA have dedicated as our National Day of Action. And we hope you'll join us in taking that pledge. A final thanks to Jessica for the hard work that she did in organizing our panel today, as well as to our wonderful, powerful women leader panelists. So thank you all for being here. And we're done. Awesome.